you would kid him mercilessly about it until they realized that the planes that he was caring for didn't seem to have any forced landings, and so the pilots, I think, recognized that too. But yeah, so it was just in his nature. He had a short career as a demonstration pilot, flying air shows and doing stunts and aerobatics, and that came to an end actually. And he was doing a show over Venice Beach, and where they were hired to fire fireworks from an aircraft, and his assistant had a little mishap and set the wing on fire.
Oh gosh.
and Music barely managed to land the plane, to crash land the plane, and they escaped with their lives. And,
wow.
And he decided that was it, for stunt flying for him. So it's incredible. I mean, he was really, in some respects, was living on borrowed time. He had already lived through one in-flight fire, and yeah, I mean, he in World War I, he joined the Marines, but they would not send him overseas. They wouldn't send him to France and to combat because he was considered too valuable. Because they needed instructors, and who at that time was ever could have possibly been more experienced in flying, and there was hardly anyone. And yeah, he so he really concentrated on after then, when the post-war, and there's a lot of surplus aircraft and a lot of people who have been now trained how to fly and are taking those first steps towards creating the new industry. That Music wanted to be a part of that and to build it up, and other pilots under him, that he quickly became the Pan American. He became the chief pilot. He was pilot number one. And some of the more seat of your pants flyers would kind of chafe under his rules and his restrictions, and how he wanted their flights conducted. And he said, we're not stuntmen. We're running a railroad. And so it's that we have to be you have to be different. You have to be more meticulous and more reliable and not so flamboyant. And yet even so he still held at one time more records and firsts and than any active pilot, just as a byproduct almost of the routes that they were opening up, and that he would make first flights between places that had never been connected by air, or he would do test flights and endurance runs in these airplanes that they were developing. And so in order to extend their range and make longer and longer flights, and it really culminated in 1935, 3 years before he was lost in Samoan Clipper. But he piloted the China Clipper, which made the first scheduled trans-Pacific flight, all the way from California to Hawaii, Midway, Wake, Guam, and on to Manila in the Philippines. And it was justly celebrated for that feat. And in fact, he was on the cover of Time magazine, the December 2nd issue, 1935. And that same year, he was recognized with the Harmon Trophy, which was awarded to the world's outstanding aviator. So he was, at least in his time, he was quite celebrated, though not to the degree of a Lindbergh or Earhart or Wiley Post or anyone like that. but yeah, I mean, he had his share of fame, though he didn't like it. He shied away from the spotlight and thought it was all too much. You know, he just wanted to fly and really chafed under the you know, Pan Am's director of publicity, William Van Dusen, and who tried to encourage him before that China Clipper flight, that he wanted him to send back some good copy for the papers. And Music just said, well, you know, what do you want me to say? So Van Dusen was like, well, you know, describe the sunset over the Pacific. So the plane takes off, and a few hours later, Pan Am radio station in San Francisco receives a message that says, sunset 6:39.
Straight to the point.
Yes, exactly.
Wow. And someone asked, did they make a movie about Ed Music? There was one that was sort of roughly based on his character maybe, but not explicitly on his life or his story.
Yes, Warner Brothers made a movie in 1936 called China Clipper. So, you know, that flight had taken place at the end of 1935 and was a big deal. I mean, it really captured people's imaginations. It was practically the moonshot of you know, transoceanic travel, and so you know, Warner Brothers wanted to make a movie about it, and Pan Am cooperated, you know, with it, because of course it was, you know, nothing but great publicity for the airline, though for whatever reason it was a fictionalized account. So I've actually been meaning to watch it. I've never had the chance to see it, but I think it's, you know, it has some fictional name, like, you know, National something Airlines or you know, Oceanic, or I don't know but yeah, I think Pat O'Brien, you know, plays you know, the equivalent of Juan Trippe, the founder of Pan American, and Humphrey Bogart plays the captain of the plane that makes the flight, the China Clipper. So Humphrey Bogart, very early in his career, you know, was playing Ed Music.
Cool. Yeah, the movie was called China Clipper, 1936.
I'm going to go ahead and mark this target. There's some interesting horizontal lines, parallel lines. So starboard side, 100 meters out. That's target 34.
Can I see the file name for this? How would you describe this?
Say again?
How would you describe this feature?
The part that made it interesting is sort of just on the edge here. So it was it's a long object with sort of unique, sort of 3 or 4 parallel features towards the bottom. The evenly spaced 3 or 4 of those parallel lines together was interesting.
Okay.
at least going back to look at it again in the record.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So are the 30-something odd targets that we've dropped forming any sort of pattern in the search area?
Hard to say. They seem to be all over the place at this point. The two ones that Mike had found, the 30 and 31, were close to each other. Definitely that's something to take in consideration, is the layout of where these all fall.
Yeah.
You would think there'd be a grouping of them. Since all of us are finding these on different watches, we'll sit down as a group together and look through them all and get everybody's opinion.
So Dee Dee, as I'm looking at these, you know, in real time with you, I can kind of see what you're seeing. But obviously you have such a trained eye. And what sort of, I mean, what brought you here? Like, what training did you do, and how did you get to become such an expert in side scan sonar reading?
Oh, and I have to say, I am by no means an expert compared to many of my colleagues. I can get by. It's definitely sort of a learned technique. While the theory is the same from you know, unit to unit and software to software, there's definitely differences. But really, just having someone next to you who knows a lot more than you sit down and, while you're doing them, just talk you through everything. So, you know, you learn to see something and then mark it, and then what subsequently comes from it through either scuba diving or ROV investigations to figure out, was I seeing what I thought I was seeing or just totally off? And it's all up for interpretation. That's why it's sort of an art. There are true masters in this field. It's an art form.
Yeah, it really is. And I was talking to somebody as well that it's, you know, they said something like, "Oh my gosh, I don't even know. I've always thought it'd be so cool to be on a expedition vessel, and you know, how does somebody get there?" And here I am listening to this live feed, and everybody in the control van has such a different background, which is really cool to kind of see all of these different paths come together on one expedition, and everybody sort of plays a very pivotal role in that as well.
Yeah, I think that's good camaraderie. We are all learning from each other, no matter what our field is. I think to be at least cross-trained to understand what other people's jobs are is really important too.
And so we're operating at about a little over 3,000 meters, which is 10,000 feet. And as someone pointed out, that is a long way to sink. So what, you know, maybe past experiences or things that we've found, what would help us understand how maybe these different pieces of the plane would have fallen? Would they have scattered widely or maybe closer together?
Part of that is what we're looking to find out, because there is not as much historical information as we would like. We do have reports about some of the events leading up to the Samoan Clipper's demise and sinking, including that it was observed that the wing was intact and floating on the surface before the ultimate event that led to it sinking. So this is good news in that we hope to find that section more intact, not necessarily broken up into pieces. So that's the sort of information that helps us as we're looking at the side scan sonar scroll. Are we seeing something that looks like a large wing with engines attached to it?
And we're looking specifically for that large wing with, you know, the potential for engines still attached to it, because that is the sturdiest part of the plane, right? And that is more than likely the one part that would have been able to withstand impact or explosion.
Yeah, it makes sense, that the description of it, being intact, given that it really is the strongest part of the aircraft. The Sikorsky S-42B, the wing was a double spar, stress skin construction, and considered immensely strong. And you find that in most airplanes. It's the most critical component, and therefore the most robust. So it makes a lot of sense. And if that is true, then we have a target that is 118 feet across and 13 feet wide, and potentially with these um, four engines each weighing a half ton apiece, arrayed along the leading edge, which would be a very distinctive signature, wherever it may lay on the bottom. Um, and also the investigators at the time, uh, surmised that the wreckage would have been fairly, tightly concentrated. Judging from the nature of the artifacts that they were finding, or the debris that they were finding at the site, that it was all, relatively small, and from only two or three of the central compartments of the airplane. So if it had been a kind of a high altitude, high speed impact, you would have thought that the plane would have broken up into many more components, and larger pieces would have been found at the scene. But they were relatively discreet, and the feeling was that the majority of the wreckage had held together, and being of metal construction had held together somewhat, and sunk in a relatively tight concentration. And again, because it was a very relatively low altitude and low speed at the time of the incident, where it's not something like the case of TWA Flight 800, where the plane that was also a fuel tank explosion, but where the plane was climbing through several thousand feet, and continued on, and spread itself, over a vast area of Long Island Sound, as the wreckage, rained down from high altitude. So that is not, not the case here. But as you said, as the viewer pointed out, that the 10,000 feet is still a long way to fall, and we have no idea of what happened once those items left the surface, what kind of hydrodynamic forces acted on it, and could it have pieces that were still maybe held together at the surface, did those stresses pull them apart, and would they have landed close together or further apart, and how would something that's relatively flat and long, like the wing, would it have sunk straight down with those engines, the weight of those engines? Maybe it would have just pulled it straight down, rather than kind of fluttering like a leaf on the wind. But that will be something that if we can pinpoint the debris field, we would want to map the extent of it, and then be able to start to make educated guesses about, or develop theories about how that distributed itself.
So I have a question. Does a wing behave in water the same way as it does in air as it's falling to the seafloor?
Oh, good one.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about that, and there's talk about airplanes, flying through the water as they fall, and it seems like it's divided on the subject. I'm sort of in the camp that no, they don't. They just fall pretty much straight down. That there's no real input, and that water is heavier than air, and that especially with the weight of the engine and the nose and unpowered, that it just drags it down. But I don't know. I mean, if they're broken up into lighter components, that it's not, that they may, again, kind of flutter like confetti, So you know, we'll see what we can find out, you know, out here.
Yeah, I'm sure they've done model testing on that for sure.
I'm sure someone
Yeah.
probably has,
Yeah.
yeah. Maybe they'll write in and tell us about the the experiments they've done.
Yes, please do.
Yeah,
Please do.
Do it. And then, kind of jumping off of that, whatever educated guesses that we can make here, I mean, is there potential to apply that information to other similar instances and future research?
Yes, that is the goal, is to take whatever we find from this project and to compile a report and get that out into the public so that colleagues and historians, archaeologists, people studying how, material corrodes and behaves underwater can use that information for further study.
And then we're currently on line 9. Do we have an idea of how many more lines we're going for?
I think we're going to continue through the night and reassess probably, after, breakfast time or so, and see how many more we want to do. We'll probably get another one started on this shift, and then maybe another, 1.5 after that, and then see where we are.
And we're doing right now a pace of about 1 line in 2 hours or so.
Yeah, that's about right.
Cool. It's cool as well, talking about this sort of multidisciplinary backgrounds that everybody has. And I think we've counted there are 3 pilots as well on board with us. Russ, you're one of them.
Yeah.
And Lonnie and our ROV pilot, Summer. So we were all 3, as well as,
I'm a pilot.
the rest of the PSYOPS crew coming over from Apia and Samoa and on the plane together, and we had like 5 pilots total out of 19 people or 20 people, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, we just found out we have another pilot in the back row here.
Suna, are you a pilot as well?
Yep.
Check it out. Right on. So that's also, a kind of a cool perspective to be looking at this event, this accident with, having experience in the cockpit as well. And, it sort of maybe rings true to your experience just in terms of having that sort of perspective.
I'm sorry, I didn't listen. I wasn't listening. I wasn't listening.
I think that was a 10 o'clock ramble that I just had.
No, she was just talking about how your experience as a pilot would give you a perspective on the whole story and having that knowledge, that firsthand knowledge.
I honestly, I don't really know how to feel about this. I mean, in general, I think flying over very large amounts of water and oceans in general is a scary thing, especially for single engine pilots. I have no experience in ditching, and in general the concept of emergency landing is, I mean, we've been trained how to act in these situations, but it's probably nothing like a real emergency. So it's hard to really tell how that would be different of a real situation.
Yeah, and that brings us back to the same ideas that these were real people with stories and families, and, you know, what they experienced was a tragedy. And so part of this, too, is sort of bringing closure to that story and being able to understand maybe what happened and, you know, to do justice to the people that were involved.
Yeah, I know. I'd like to see that happen, and bring that, as you say, bring that closure to 7 families, and to the extended, you know, Pan American family and the aviation community as well, and I just think there's something that unites us in that, and that sentiment of, you know, no one left behind, and that it, you know, challenges us and drives us forward to try and find those answers, and that it doesn't really matter that we never got to know these people. They're still you know, human beings who had, you know, hopes and dreams, and people who loved them, and if we can apply, you know, our abilities and our you know, talents and knowledge to that goal, then it's a worthy one indeed.
I'm looking at a holiday card that was sent out by Pan American's chief engineer, Andre Priester. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but, you know, alongside the Pan Am logo are the words thorough, alert, resourceful, prudent. So this concept of safety really was, you know, at the core of their mission of bringing aviation to sort of the everyday person.
Yeah, most definitely. That wasn't a Nautilus that just dropped by, was
No,
it?
that was a sea cucumber.
Oh, okay.
Holothurian.
Ah, man, I wanted to see a Nautilus when I'm on the Nautilus.
And the sea cucumber number is actually being updated as we speak. Wow.
I missed that one, but I believe Suna.
Thanks, Miles. I didn't know we were counting the Holothurians.
That was Russ's number.
Oh, really?
Number 13.
Yeah, the previous watch started a cucumber count.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They started with 8. We're up to 13 now.
All right.
Or I'm sorry, they ended with 8. We started with 8.
There was also a whole discussion about, have you ever eaten a sea cucumber? So I don't think anybody had eaten one before.
I've eaten a sea cucumber.
Was it good?
It was actually delicious.
Oh.
Yeah. I got the sea cucumber by myself and figured out how to like clean it and cook it up, and it tasted just like calamari. It sounds weirder than it is.
And I would not have thought the texture would have been that solid.
Yeah, so it's really interesting if you want to find out. A sea cucumber, when you sort of fillet it open, it has 4 big strips of meat, and each of those is kind of like a large, like, calamari strip, like a squid strip kind of. And then when you fry it up in butter, it tastes just like calamari. It was pretty good. But, you know, maybe it's just because I'm a weird Alaskan.
Or maybe it's because if you fry anything in butter, it's going to be delicious.
That's true, too. Okay, getting off of that tangent, Russ, how long would an intact wing be?
The wing on the Sikorsky S-42B was 118 feet 2 inches across and 13 feet wide. And the airplane overall was 68 feet long and 21 feet high from the keel to the tip of the top of the rudders. And then the horizontal tail would be 38 feet across. So, you know, pretty substantial airplane. Unfortunately, there are no examples of this type of airplane preserved anywhere in any museum or collection anywhere in the world. The only traces of them survive, in the ocean. And in fact, I think Simone Clipper may be the only one that is still, remaining. You know, there were a couple of, and you will find this if you look it up on Wikipedia. They list 2 potential wrecks in the, at least one potential wreck in the Caribbean off of Cuba. And I'm here to tell you, I found the accident report, and they salvaged it. They brought it up. They did exactly what they wanted to do with Simone Clipper. They,
Oh, wow.
they located the wreck and retrieved it, and yeah. So as far as we know, there certainly are no known wrecks of this type of aircraft anywhere. So this would be a first. And there's really no existing traces of any of Pan Am's flying boats. There's a few examples of smaller types, but not ones that had served with the airline. The closest analog that I know of to Simone Clipper is the next model that Sikorsky developed was called the VS-44, but it was actually operated by a rival airline, American Export Lines, and they built 3 or 4 of them, and one still exists. It was brought back to the factory, the Sikorsky factory, and restored by retired employees in the 80s. You know, in most cases by the people who had built the plane originally, and it is now on display in Windsor Locks, Connecticut, at the New England Air Museum. And the director there, Debbie Reed, was kind enough to allow me the opportunity to study it firsthand. And it was really something to step into that hangar, and you're kind of struck by the scale of it. It really is something. You know, this massive 4-engine aircraft, and this one, the VS-44 is has the wingspan is just maybe about 6 feet wider, and maybe about 10 feet longer in the fuselage. So not a giant stretch away from what Simone Clipper had been, except that they added an upper deck. There was an upper deck for the flight crew, and it kind of the wing was more molded into the rest of the plane, rather than if you look at the pictures of Simone Clipper, it's kind of perched on this pylon in the center. And a real treat, in that visit to see the airplane was that I was joined by somebody who I'd really had been wanting to meet for a long time. Was the chairman of the Pan Am Historical Foundation, and who has you know, he's quite a accomplished historian and has a unique perspective on Pan Am and its history, in that he is also the son of its founder. So his name is Ed Tripp, and he is the son of Juan Tripp, and a very you know, accomplished man in his own right. But it was incredible to you know, get to meet him and talk with him in that setting, and we were, you know, very grateful as well to the New England Air Museum for making that possible, and for their museum volunteers who guided us around. And I have to say, when we arrived at the museum, there were two gentlemen there waiting anxiously who had been Pan Am pilots in their career. One of them had his Pan American mug in hand, and I got a little taste of what it must be like to be, you know, like you know, Justin Timberlake's manager when you walk in, and his fans greet him, and I could never, like, it was like I didn't exist. They just, you know, wanted to talk Pan Am with Ed Tripp, and he was very gracious with them and was happy to do it. So it was really just another one of the perks of you know, having been conducting this investigation for so long.
Yeah, it's kind of taking you all over the world, right? It's pretty cool.
Absolutely, you know, well, at least from Connecticut to to, you know, American Samoa. Yeah, absolutely. So you know, at some point, you know, maybe you know, visit some of the areas and go as far away as you know, the Ireland and the UK and the areas where the Flying Clippers landed in the Atlantic as well. But yeah, I mean, Pan Am at one point was a worldwide concern, and you could fly, you know, around the world on the Pan Am Airways system. So
In music's time, Pan Am was still relatively small, correct? It wasn't this sort of empire of an airline that we maybe know it today.
in his lifetime, it made great strides to being that. But yes, you're absolutely correct that when he joined the airline, I don't even think they owned a plane yet, and they had to scramble to again, to satisfy their first contract. They found a couple of aircraft that were on their way to consign to someone else, and managed to you know, charter them for their use to you know, make that first run. But yeah, there's apparently in Key West there's a building that where it's a restaurant now, but it's you know, it's a very modest little house, but there's a sign out front that says that was the first headquarters of Pan American Airways, and they started out you know, flying the route from Key West to Havana, Cuba, and that was the start of the strategy that Juan Tripp had come up with, to put this airline and make it viable, that they would compete for and claim government mail contracts, and so that's why they became really, you know, the international air carrier, was to carry these mails and the paying passengers, you know, you know, further afield. And though somebody has pointed out as well that it's maybe not a real coincidence that Pan Am as well, you know, started out with flights, you know, from Florida to these nearby countries that you know, not only you know, for the perhaps not only for the mail contracts, but that they realized there'd be a reliable source of passengers eager to fly somewhere where they could legally have a drink. So yes, so they would. That's why there's a you know, a real desire and demand for you know, the ability to make that journey, you know, to Cuba and points beyond.
Wow. And when we were at port in Ponga Ponga, there was, I think we talked about it, a building downtown that's now an inn, and there's maybe a theory that that had been some sort of office for Pan Am.
Yeah, I read in there's an author by the name of John Krupnick who's actually been very helpful in our investigation, and he's the author of a book called Pacific Pioneers that I would highly recommend if you have any interest in this era. It is richly illustrated and very thorough, and he reports that the Pan Am base was at least in the location of what is now the Sadie Thompson Sadie Thomas Inn, Sadie Thompson Inn.
I think it was Thompson, yeah.
Yeah, Sadie Thompson Inn. I went by there. I've looked at it. I have the photograph from John's book, and I don't recognize the building isn't at least it isn't recognizable as what it was, if that is the same building or if it's simply a building that was put up in that location. And the waterfront has changed. It's been very highly developed now. There's a lot more modern shipping piers and things and retail establishments, things that are built along the waterfront that weren't there in 1938. We have the photograph of the Clipper taxiing back to the base, and there's really just the one lone kind of wooden dock that stretches out from just a scattering of buildings. So the town has been transformed quite a bit, though the contours of the ridgeline and the mountains around it are unmistakable.
And then, Dee, when we're looking at the sonar data, how far out is it mapping? And can you talk a little bit about what Argus is seeing versus what the sonar is picking up?
Sure. So we are looking at two different types of data feeds coming into us right now. There is the side scan sonar, which is the top left of your screen, which is referred to as the waterfall, the orange-yellow sort of scrolling screen, as well as the top right, which is the video camera that is on Argus looking out ahead of itself. The side scan sonar is looking out 150 meters at its most on each side, so for a total coverage of 300 meters, while the camera that Argus has a field of view of about 20 meters, plus or minus, I believe. So these data types are different. The side scan sonar uses acoustic data or sound to image the seafloor and bring us back these images of a fairly flat bottom right now, while we are lucky enough to have eyeballs through the camera and be able to see exactly what's on the seafloor right under us with the Argus camera.
And it's pretty unique to have a camera working collaboration, I guess, with this sonar ability, right?
Yes, very unique. It's typically not done. This is the first time I think I've heard of doing this simultaneously.
What is that thing in this? Is that just a...
It's, I think, another sea cucumber, was it?
Hmm.
Sorry. Oh, no.
Sorry.
Got to add the cucumber
yeah.
count. Oh, something, another one.
Yeah.
So this is a very unique way of doing remote sensing, to have also a visual aspect to it. One thing that does make it nice is you can compare what the side scan sonar is picking up to what is actually on the bottom. So that is a great learning experience, a great interpretation and outreach experience to inform people how technology works and how we use it to virtually map the seafloor.
And right now, we're just going through and finding any points that sort of resemble what may be something that's human caused, right? That sort of
Correct.
indicates the airplane. And so what will we do after we've collected all of this data?
So we're going to finish our survey box and take all of the targets that we have cataloged and re-look at those, do some post-processing through the side scan sonar software to clean them up a little. Sit down as a group together and decide what are our priority targets. Next, I believe the thought was, since we had Argus in the water and it does have a camera system, to potentially go over directly those targets. Since we have not seen anything with the Argus camera, we've only had targets from the side scan sonar. Based upon what we find from that secondary look, we will put Hercules, the larger ROV, in the water for a more detailed examination and documentation.
Right, because it takes, is it about 4 hours to get
Yeah, I
Argus
heard
up and down?
8 hours.
8 hours.
Yeah, I'm not the best one to speak to that, but it's not a simple, quick reattachment.
It could take up to 8 hours, so we're going to budget for that. Ideally, everything goes smoothly and it just plugs right in, but there's always some unforeseen complications. Most times we do it. So in an ideal world, we get it done in 4 hours, but it could take up to 8.
I'm sort of filling the time too, for those of you who are a little bit more curious. The Nautilus live blog has some awesome links and photos of the Samoan Clipper, and you can find the Pan Am Historical Society's links as well that sort of give a little bit more insight into you know, the Clipper and the events leading up to what happened, and paints a little bit more of an image of who Ed Musick was and his crew. So if you're curious and a visual learner, head on over that way. There's quite a bit of information. I mean, you know, it was 81 years ago, but these archives, you know, at least based on the work that's been done in recent years, is pretty encompassing, wouldn't you say, Russ?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
These archives, they have quite a bit of information just in terms of, you know, the radiograms and the newspapers and the photos that are available.
Yeah, it's astonishing, really, what was still remaining for us to find and to work with. You know, starting especially with those radiograms, that the record of the correspondence between the people here, you know, on the ground in American Samoa, and the executives back at the headquarters of the Pacific Division in San Francisco, and you can really, you know, track the whole drama of those days as it unfolded and how the people living in that time experienced it. And then you know, there's the you know, the deck logs from the USS Avocet at the National Archives, and those radiograms that we mentioned are preserved in a special collection at the University of Miami Libraries, and were actually saved by the foresight of Ed Tripp and others working with him, you know, at the Pan Am Historical Foundation, and then the Igor Isikorsky Historical Archive as well maintains you know, a really a wealth of information on the development and work of that innovative aircraft designer, and they've been incredible in the support that they've given to us, and digging out you know construction drawings and photos um, and diagrams of relating to the S-42 type and Samoan Clipper in particular. So yeah, and then recently the San Francisco Examiner put all of digitized its archives and is available online, and that was something, because the coverage in that paper was I think a lot more thorough, in that was essentially a company town, for the Pacific Division of Pan American, and so they gave the story a lot of attention, sometimes very sensationalized attention, but certainly very, very thorough.
And this mission was sort of conceived about 5 years ago, right? What sort of documentation and information was available then? I mean, it's been a cold case for 8 decades.
Oh yeah, yeah. So the original spark, if you will, was Dr. James Delgado, who was then the Director of Maritime Heritage for NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, and a good friend and a colleague. Invited me to assist him in preparing white papers to suggest targets of opportunity in the Eastern Pacific, targets for exploration, and that would be presented at a workshop hosted in San Francisco by OET and NOAA, and I kind of racked my brain for ideas, and Jim and I worked on a number of shipwrecks, some of which have been worked on already by Nautilus. In 2016, we were on the wreck of USS Independence, the light carrier off of San Francisco, and the year before, Nautilus was on the site of an airship wreck, the USS Macon, that was lost in 1935, and our own Megan Licklider Munden was was part of the Corps of Exploration for that mission. So yeah, but I had actually, I'm embarrassed to say, but only a kind of a vague notion that something had happened to Pan American's chief pilot, and just started doing the very basic research, and just uncovered this incredible story that I had not been familiar with, and so that's been a real pleasure for me, and very gratifying to have learned a lot in the process of looking into this, but I knew it. We needed to go beyond Wikipedia and find out, find the original primary source material, and the first person I turned to for that was Lonnie Shore, who's here on the ship with us as well, and put out the call to her because she's an aviation historian, a pilot, an explorer, an architect, and an author, and many other things, but also a very gifted researcher, and she happens to live very close to the National Archives. So recruited her to see if she could find the original source material, and especially I was interested in was there an accident report, because this was an American transport plane that was lost in an American territory, and you would assume that there would have been some sort of investigation by what was then the Bureau of Air Commerce, and she chased it for a few weeks at least, and through several different archives, and until finally discovering a copy of it at the in the files of the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, and managed to get me a copy, and that was a gold mine. The thorough work that they had done. 81. Well, let's see, 80. No, at that time, 76 years earlier when we started the project. But yeah, it was really something. Of course, now that is available on Wikipedia. If you were to look it up now,
Right.
it is linked there. So somebody has uploaded it in the time since. But yeah, those other items like the radiograms, came from a really dedicated researcher that we just contacted the University of Miami, and they assigned someone to work on it with us. And they can only give you a certain limited amount of time unless you come in, and then your time is unlimited, and they will assist you if you appear in person. But just working remotely, they'll get you started. They'll give you I think by the clock something like 20 or 30 minutes of their their researchers' time, and then it's up to you. But even in that limited amount of time, they provided us just a wealth of information in those radiograms, and also in the period map that was kept at the time, where they were sketching out everything that they knew, and it showed the route of the Samoan Clipper as it departed, and actually it goes off the map and then comes back again, and then goes tracks over to Apia, and then back over to Tutuila, American Samoa, and and it has there marked right on the map, smoke seen by, well, what they say, smoke seen by natives, by the locals there on Tutuila, and oil slick spotted by Navy plane, and a hash mark, an X, on the map where all that was seen, and with notations about the radio messages that were delivered, and the times they were received, and it's really something to see it there, and just in the as it was sketched in, as they were consolidating all the information that they had, and trying to determine what had happened, and I have no idea what how in the world all of these things, who had the foresight to gather all of this together and save it till a time when it could be used again. I don't know that anyone living in 1938 ever imagined that there might be an opportunity to finally to reach the wreck and determine or obtain new clues as to what happened.
Right, that's such an interesting thought too. We're so used to everything being readily available online, and yet there's this huge event that took place that there was very little record available on the internet. And so it took, even in recent years, took a whole team to sort of dive in and find all of those records and bring it to light.
Yeah, I mean, the internet is a fantastic tool, and is a great place to start to get your bearings on what this is, and get the the basic story. But if you really want to know, if you really want to dig down and learn, determine the truth of something, that nothing beats finding those primary sources, and they're out there, and the detail that emerges from there, and the clarity that you get from it is cannot be equaled by what is necessarily a summary that someone else has put together, and they've picked and chosen what it is that is provided, some unknown author, and so it's it's up to you as the serious researcher to go and try and obtain those primary primary sources.